Dr. Warren Farrell is in studio. The boy crisis, why our boys are struggling, and what we can do about it. Good to meet you, Doctor.
I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Well, you know, I was doing a little pre-interview on you with my staff, and everything you said just falls in between somewhere. Well, I've been saying it for 20 years. It's somewhere between no duh and no shit. Of course, boys need dads in the house. Of course, they need discipline. Of course, they need everything that's the opposite of everything that's being preached right now by all the idiots who we should never listen to, because I've lived through it, and I've lived with these people, and I've heard what they had to say before. And I don't know why we don't stand up to it, but we don't, and I think it's because you'll be called something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City and was sort of the world's leading male feminist. And boy, when I started speaking up about how important dads were, because I started doing research in this area and found that boys all around the world that were doing poorly were boys that were basically dad deprived. So I started saying this, and immediately the backs of the board members of NOW started really straightening and saying, excuse me, we want women to have the freedom to be able to raise children by themselves if they want, without their dads. And I said, well, I want women to have freedom too, but when women have freedom to have children, they make a free choice to put their children's benefits before their own personal freedom. And that's a choice that you freely make, or you don't make that choice. And so it was like suddenly the Warren Farrell, sort of perfect person became Warren Farrell, better watch out for him. And so that was the beginning of my research, in a sense, for the boy crisis. And I really knew that the degree to which I found out that fathers were important, and I understood the importance of roughhousing and creating empathy, for example.
Yes.
And they were just unable to hear it. And I'm thinking, you're supposed to be liberal. Well, we're progressive. Progressive, first of all, that's a self-righteous name to call yourself. Anyone that calls themselves progressive believes they have the answer. That's really self-righteous. It's not progressive.
Well, there's a kind of a math that we've done, and we've kind of jumped the shark. So we did a math. So the problem is the math, and here's what I'm saying. We said, hey, we need a country. We live in a country that needs to help women because they're weaker, and they need to help African Americans because they're a product of slavery, and we need to help Hispanic people, and we need to help people. Yeah. And so we started off going, okay, that's what we shall do. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain point, we went, wait a minute, who do we need to help them from? And we turned around and went, oh, white guys. Oh, white males. Oh, old white males. Okay. So instead of just helping this one group, we decided to go after another group sort of simultaneously. And by the way, since the groups, by and large, or many of them, are doing just fine, we got no more targets left. So we have to just focus on. I am amazed, and I'm stupefied by the ease that people will sit next to older white males, like on a CNN panel, go, well, the problem is old white males, like, and then the guy will be like nodding his head,
we
like,
sure are.
we sure are. Like, no, it's not all. Some like some of everything. It's a path to not solving anything. You're just going to blame old whitey for everything, or males for everything, or announce that fathers are unimportant or whatever. Good luck solving any of the problems.
And the challenge is that we say on the one hand to young boys, I think since the boy crisis was published, I've gotten so many letters from parents that says, I have a son. He's in 7th or 8th grade. The teachers are putting down males, and they're putting down white males in particular, as you said. And so, and they talk about toxic masculinity. So I ask my son to say, what is toxic masculinity? And it almost always includes things like, men don't speak up. They don't express their feelings. So my son then expresses his feelings, and he's told he's mansplaining. And, and then he's told when it gets to be boy-girl time that men oftentimes are too forward, and they're sexual harassers. So he really tries to be very careful on his date and very cautious, and asks the girl or woman, are you okay with my holding your hand and stuff like that? And the girl or woman says yes or no, but at the end says, you're such a sweet guy, but I think we should be friends. And so he's caught between this taking the initiatives and not taking the initiatives, and he feels like he's caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yes. So boys, I was just talking about this with Dr. Drew yesterday, which is boys not only, you kind of think that they push back against discipline. They crave discipline. Like, they need discipline and they crave it. They do push back against it, but it's not the same kind of. There are things, in life where it's like you push back against parking tickets because you don't want the parking ticket. You don't like the parking. It's not that. It's a pushback, but that's what we do. We're like rams that have to buck our horns up in the Alpines. Guys crave discipline, and when you grow up, when a male grows up especially, women, young girls need it too, but when they grow up in a zero-gravity environment in terms of discipline, that kid's a mess. And I was talking to...
it's time for school. Kid says, I'm tired.
That's what I just did with my kid today. I told believe me, I'm going to tell the nanny to give him what for. Tear him a new a-hole. Go, Olga, go. You want a wooden spoon? Have at it. I'll sign a release. So it was too late by the time I thought he was at school. Anyway, no, so... Here's the thing. I was talking to Dr. Drew about this, and I was explaining. I forgot. I had this story where I played Pop Warner football, and I dislocated my shoulder, and it was out for 4 days. I also broke my humerus bone as well. So I figured it out because he was telling me what kind of cast I had on. It was to weight it down, and it was so the bone could repair itself, and blah, blah, blah. And it was a very... graphic story about my humerus bone broken and my shoulder dislocated and the weight of the cast to try to get it to heal itself, and that's how they set those bones and it repairs itself. So anyway, I was hell-bent on playing Pop Warner football the next year, and I never thought why. Everyone who came from normal childhoods, I didn't come from one, but everyone did was like, why would you go back to that? You had this horrible injury. I craved discipline, and I wasn't getting any kind of discipline from my waif dad. So I went there where Mr. Duke Gallagher, Mr. Fitzgerald could yell at me, and that's where I went. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was seeking it out.
Yes, and you said in your Chicks book, it's discipline and camaraderie, and that's the two connections. And when men and dads tend to be much more likely to roughhouse with their kids, and while the dads are roughhousing, the mom is looking over and saying, "Oh my God, I have just one more child to monitor here." Mm-hmm. Right. And so then the kids, let's say the kids are thrown on the couch by the dad, and the job is to the three kids to jump on the dad's back and pin him down before he pins the three of them down. And so this builds bonds with the kids. Like the camaraderie that you were talking about when you play football. And so but then the bonds are not just the bonds. The father then says, excuse me, you can fake me out, you can do whatever you want to, but you can't stick your elbow in your sister's eye, to win, to be the big kingpinner. Oh, okay, daddy, okay, no problem. So then they go back to the roughhousing again, and the kids do the same thing all over again because they're more excited, by the roughhousing experience. So dad says, okay, then there's no more roughhousing till tomorrow night. Oh, Dad, no, we'll pay attention to this time. No more roughhousing till tomorrow night. Tomorrow night comes, Dad gives the same mandate to, not to pay attention to your sister's feelings. And this time the kids pay attention because they know they'll lose the roughhousing.
It's a consequence.
Well, yes, it's a consequence. Whereas the mother's looking at this and saying, I predicted this is going to end up in, somebody crying. And then after it does end up in somebody crying, you're going back to the roughhousing again without understanding that, yes, he's giving a consequence. And then by going back to the roughhousing again, he enforces the consequence and lets the kids know that when he says something, there is, as you said, that consequence. And so moms, as a rule, and some moms do get this, but many moms do not get this. And there's a tension between mom and dad.
Yes.
But what moms and dads don't get is that there has to be an equal amount of power on the part of the father to be able to say, this is something, here's why I'm doing this. And to know that roughhousing is connected to children being more empathetic is very counterintuitive. And dads need to learn that. They need to explain that. Moms can't hear what dads don't say. They also need to know that roughhousing helps children distinguish between being assertive versus being aggressive. These are really important life skills. And as a result of knowing that difference, you're much more likely to have friends, keep friends, be much less likely to be depressed and withdrawn in school.
Well, it was always I did an insane amount of roughhousing. That's all I did was wrestle my friends. We didn't have any money or any video games or anything. We just wrestled. That's all I did was wrestle. my friends, nonstop. And you're always kind of walking a line between being very aggressive in your wrestling and your attempts to throw them down on the ground or pin them or hold them down or get them in a headlock, and actually hurting them by hitting them with a punch or an elbow.
Walking that line was the best part.
The line was the best part. And you could get exquisitely rough, but without physically hurting the other person, because you make sure once in a while somebody caught an elbow or a knee or something and you had to stop.
I was going to say, it was all headlocks. It was rarely, I can't remember ever punching like my friends.
The
the
rules
face.
were no punching, and other than
Lots
that,
of
there were no
lots off the top rope.
No rules.
Well, it's like what dogs do. Dogs know the difference between playing and hurting each other.
Right. And so,
you guys are dogs.
It used to.
That's all I got from that.
The notion. See, I always had this answer because people go, well, how come men do this and how come women have to do that? And how come the men build the bridges and women take care of the kids? And I go, because that's the way it is. Like, that's guys roughhouse because that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing it to anger the wives. We're doing it because that's what we do. Now, the wives would understand that in nature very well. You see it all the time in nature, the differences between the young bucks and the girls and everything else. But this is what's going on at home, and we're trying to stomp this out, and it's a bad idea because you're screwing with nature and what is.
What's important is for the men to be listening to what the mom's contribution is as well. And it's the children that I discovered that the children that are raised the best, that do the best, are ones that are exposed to what I call checks and balance parenting. The mom says, no, sweetie, you can't climb the tree. You're too young. Maybe next year. Dad says, let the kid climb the tree. Mom says, what? They're going to fall out. You're going to take responsibility for concussion. And they have a dialogue about it. And the agreement is some version of, well, they can climb the tree, but only this high. And you've got to be out there and give me your cell phone. Pay focus attention on whether the kids are going too far, too fast, too smooth. What dads don't understand, and they don't explain to moms, is that when you climb that tree, you increase your ability not only to know which risks can and shouldn't be taken, you also increase your IQ, you increase your psychomotor functioning. Dads don't read up on these things. They don't explain it to moms. So therefore, moms just think that dads are being reckless, when in fact, dads are really creating a whole series of social, intellectual skills that are reforming the children's brains, not only for their sons, but also for their daughters.
Yeah. Again, it's that sort of, you're putting bubble wrap around everyone and sunscreen and helmets on everyone. And, when you get in a car, put your seatbelt on.
Yes,
I wouldn't argue with that, but you have to climb a tree and you have to wrestle and you have to stand up to a bully, and all these bumps and bruises and things like that heal very quickly. I always say being a pussy is a lifetime sentence. I have way too many of those now. And yes, we need a balance. And what's happening is, I used to talk to Dr. Drew about this a million years ago. I wrote a book called 50 Years We'll All Be Chicks for a reason. Drew would always say, the answer is the feminine road is the evolved road. So he'd sort of look at it like, and also he's pussy whipped, but and he knew his wife was listening. But
he was transitioning.
The future is female.
Well, at the beginning, it was all guys grabbing people by the hair and dragging them into the cave. And we went, all right, well, that's no good. Like, it's too far that way. So we went, well, what's the opposite of that? And it's like, well, the feminine route. And back in 1999, Drew and I would talk about this on Loveline. He'd go, that's the evolved, that's the direction. And the direction is no wrestling, talking, and the direction is holding hands, not screwing on the first date. And everything from the movies you watch, the TV show was all more evolved. And it seems sort of sensible. Like, well, if the old version was cavemen and dragged by the hair and raped in the cave, and then there's this, let's go the opposite and let's keep going. The truth is that's right on some issues, and then wrestling, roughhousing, and many other discipline and many other things are correct as well. It's both. It's not just let's just keep going this direction toward the light.
The two basic things is heroic intelligence versus health intelligence. And heroic intelligence was training for a short life, and health intelligence is training for a long life. However, heroic intelligence teaches you how, when the going gets tough, to get going, but it doesn't teach you how, when the going gets tough, when it's right to go to a therapist. And so there's some value to both of those things.
Right.
And so and the value of both parents doing this checks and balance parenting is picking up the balance, not going from one extreme to the other. Because we know that children raised predominantly by females are much more likely to be ADHD. They're much more likely to not be able to have postponed gratification. The boundary enforcement is very different. So a dad and mom, for example, they'll set the same boundaries. They'll say, sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. Great. Children will test those boundaries the same way. They'll try to have as few peas as possible before they get their ice cream. Moms will tend to think, okay, sweetie, I'll tell you what, have this many more peas, then you can have your ice cream. So the boy or girl has about 2/3 of that many more peas and then says, okay, can I have my ice cream now? And mom says, okay, I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. Okay. So what the child learns from the mom is that I can always manipulate a better deal if I know how to do that. Whereas with dad is more likely to say, excuse me, the deal was there's no ice cream until you finish your peas. Oh, you're so mean. Well, you can continue whining too, and then there'll be no ice cream tomorrow night. Oh God, I've got to focus on finishing the peas. And so what the children learn much more likely with the dad is the boundary enforcement produces postponed gratification that leads to the children being able to do better in school and better on the discipline for their football or basketball team. And those children ended up a lot more healthy and balanced. And so that was one of the core findings for the boy crisis.
The other thing Dr. Drew would always talk about, and I always agreed, this one we're simpatico on, which was delayed gratification, just being the key to all success. Every group, everybody, delayed gratification. I want you.
That's a waste of my time.
I'm going to tease this for a second. And we don't employ any of these techniques at home.
But you're aware of them.
I am aware of them. I attempt to try every once in a while. I'm going to tease one for you. I want to know, is there any group that is doing? Is it pretty much straight line? Like you go, well, here's how the African American community is doing. Here's how the white community is doing. Here's how the Asian community is doing. Here's how the Jewish community is doing. Is there any group that doesn't just follow the percentage of dads in the house and test scores and success and, median income and all or staying out of prison or staying out of gangs or worldwide? I'll tease it, but I mean, is it pretty much just a straight line on the graph that follows dads not being in the house versus all the things we don't want in a group?
Yes.
So, doctor, is there any community that doesn't suffer sort of equally when dads are not present?
Yeah, it's very unequal. In the African American community, 72% of children are raised with minimal or no father involvement. In the Caucasian community, it's the least, it's 30, but still 34%. Give you a little bit of a sense of this. When the Moynihan Report came out in 1965, they looked at the inner cities and were trying to find out why there was so much crime in inner cities. And they found out it was not a racial issue, but rather it was an issue of who was raised by dads versus who was not raised by dads. And they found that in the African American community at that time, 25% of children were raised in the African American community with minimal or no father involvement. So instead of looking at it as being a racial issue, they saw it as being the racial issue being a secondary issue for the lack of father involvement. And so, and we see this in...
Moynihan was a Democrat, right?
He was a Democrat. No, actually, he worked for both the Republican. He's the Secretary of Labor for Nixon and for Lyndon Johnson. So he worked under both administrations. But overall, he was a sociologist, PhD Democrat, yes.
And he just announced, this is bad. This is 25%. Yeah. This is bad. And then he got criticized for saying it was bad.
He was criticized.
And now it's 72%.
Exactly.
It's worse. So, okay, everybody, who anyone want to criticize the next batch of people who bring this up?
And the real insight is that I looked at this issue in 63 of the largest developed nations. Boys are falling behind girls in every academic subject, but especially in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of success. So I said, developed nations. Why developed nations? Developed nations have two things in common. One is a much higher percentage of divorce is permitted in developed nations. And then also there's much more permission for children to be born outside of marriage. And so I looked at those two groups. And among the children, the boys that were doing terribly, that were part of the boy crisis, it was almost always among the boys who were brought up in divorce situations where they had minimal or no father contact, or in single mom homes where the mother, in the United States, 53% of women who have children under 30 have children without being married. Most of those children are dad deprived.
All right. It's well established. I don't know. It's insane that we argue about this or that somebody gets labeled as something for bringing this up.
Or worse, that we don't argue about it.
Or worse.
Yes, very well said. Yes.
Well, yeah, quite. Now, I've been yelling about this for a million years, and all I just get shouted down and called names and a bigot, which is insane. But
he can be both, everybody.
That's
he can
right.
be a bigot and still bring up the right points.
Why can't? Yeah. Well, look at me as a racist coach with 5 black starting players who just wants to win some basketball games.
Yeah.
What's more important?
What's more important? Let's light up that scoreboard and let's all go home with our hands raised high.
You think Bear Bryant liked black people?
That's right.
No, he liked championships.
That's right. So what are we going to do, and when are the politicians going to step on this third rail, and who's going to have, and why do we have all these hypocrites talking about we're going to have an honest talk about race in this country, and this topic never comes up, or if it does, it's fifth on a line of, first we got to tear down these statues in the South, and then we can talk about dads being in the home, which is an insane priority. Everyone who's cashing a check on this stuff, Black Lives Matters or Kaepernick or whoever, no one wants to get into this. It's all talk about cops and police brutality and a bunch of other bullshit. Statistically makes no difference, but they won't get into this because they're going to lose their status as a warrior for their cause.
You are exactly on target. And
what?
And
get that drop.
Keep going.
Yes, right. I tried to work with some of the Democratic candidates. I chair a commission to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. I'm going up to talk to the Democratic candidates and with Kasich and with John Delaney about trying to represent the fact that there is a boy crisis, that we need to pay attention to it. The Democrats are almost all afraid to do this. They don't want to lose. They feel that if they do this, they'll lose their female base. But it's like such an insult to women to suggest that if you help women understand what works better for their children, that they will not vote for you. If we want respect for women, let's respect women by saying to women what the findings are that can lead to their children doing the best.
It's like a doctor saying, I don't want to tell my patient to quit smoking through a donut because I don't want to upset them.
Exactly.
Well, you're going to kill them then?
Yes.
Jesus Christ. It's insane that we've got to this point,
really,
and it's all the pussies who are woke out there. That's who's driving me nuts.
Yes. And when I was talking to the 3 Clinton advisors about this, I could persuade the Clinton advisors that something needed to be brought up about dads and boys. I even said, there's a lot of Republican mothers who are really concerned about their sons. They might even vote for you if they feel, because they care more about their sons than they do about a Republican label. Oh, very good. The advisors all behind it. They couldn't convince Hillary Clinton to talk about anything but the girl card.
Well, and doesn't it kind of not make sense? Because with Bill Clinton, wasn't he raised just by his mother?
He was raised by his mother and had a very abusive stepfather.
Right.
And, yes.
So you'd think that it would take somebody who at least will listen to anybody who said, look, I came from this and this was a struggle for me, so I'm at least allowed to bring it up.
Yes, exactly. And Obama the same way.
Right, exactly.
He had very minimal father
So where
contact.
was it?
And he is bringing up, and he did create a very active group that he's still involved with, but he hasn't been able to penetrate into the quote progressive liberal community to get a single Democratic candidate to talk about this as if it's a viable issue. And from the Republican perspective, what is common to all of the mass shooters, more than 90% of the mass shooters, is dad deprivation. Not just boys, but dad deprivation. what is common to almost all the ISIS recruits I discovered was dad deprivation. What is common to almost all of your prisoners, your male prisoners, is not only 93% being males, but more than 90% of those males are dad-deprived males. And so if you think about this just in terms of economic savings, of building prisons, of the homeland security to protect us against ISIS, the fears that we have about mass shooters, these are all very greatly reduced by dad involvement. And I was, when I presented this to the Democratic and Republican candidates and said, this is the findings of the boy crisis. And they go, oh, well, all right, the Republicans get it. The Democrats don't.
I was going to say, have you approached the current administration? Because it feels like that's a message that would resonate with them and their base.
It is, and it does seem to be resonating. But I can't, as of this point, haven't been able to get Trump to create a White House Council on Boys and Men in order to put the boys' crisis or the boys' issues on the agenda. So, and there are people working in the Civil Rights Division that care about it, but there's others that are sort of feminist in their orientation and resisting it.
I feel like Sonny could potentially be a school shooter, but he'd have to go to school.
Yeah.
So
his chances are greatly reduced to that happening.
Another bed shooter.
He may be like on the roof with his hat backwards like Wahlberg or something, but he physically have to go to the campus.
That's a buried entry.
That's a non-starter.
It's a little buried entry. Don't
get me wrong. I'm angry and struggling with my sexuality and collecting munitions.
I want to take it out on my fellow youngsters.
I got to... Hey, what about a field trip where the kids came to my house?
We all played Fortnite.
You guys know the OJ trial?
He can never be a school shooter because he has to go to school.
Yeah.
So I've always just said it this way. The lack of dads is the hub. All the things we don't want are the spokes leading out to the sort of rim of life with the prison and drugs and unemployment and then the physical abuse and the sexual abuse and all the things that were ISIS and joining gangs. Like, the hub is the no dads. All of the things we spend billions of dollars on, the prisons and the anti-gang stuff and all the programs and everything, all just emanates from the one place. And all our politicians want to do is go out to the edge of the rim and address every spoke individually. Yeah. And if anyone tries to follow the spoke into the goddamn hub, you're called a racist or bigot, homophobic or, xenophobic or misogynist or anti-this or anti-that. I mean, it's insane. I've gone on, like I've said, look, you got to make your kids lunch. You got to make them lunch in the morning. You have to get up in the morning. You have to cook breakfast. You have to pack them lunch. They need to know you're making them lunch. They don't get the free slop from school. I don't care about the money. I'll pay more in taxes. I don't care. I would need mama making lunch for them and sending them off to school. And then, that night, Young Turks, Adam Carolla says he's too cheap to buy kids good. They shouldn't have. It's like, are you nuts? What's going on? Like, when are people going to be brought up on charges? It's insane. It's insane. They sat down and broke down what I was saying and completely screwed it up 10 ways to Sunday. I don't know if everyone's lying. I don't know if everyone's insane. I know every politician just wants to be reelected and no one wants to get caught in crap. We're living in a world now where Martina Navratilova says something about transgenders playing against it. She's thrown out a lesbian movement. Everyone's scared to get everyone's getting tossed out. They'll toss their own. Yeah. Is everyone just freaked out about being tossed out?
First of all, you are exactly right. I mean,
I love you. You follow me home.
Come back anytime.
I mean, this is...
Get Lynette on the blower. Sorry.
You're out.
There's 2 new sheriffs in town, kids.
And an example of this is the mass shootings. I mean, everyone sort of, after every mass shooting says, here's the problem. The problem is the guns. The problem is too much bad stuff on TV, bad family values, bad this, bad this. But if these were the problems, then we'd have equal numbers of girls as boys who have access to guns, who have access to those values on TV, who come from these types of families. But we don't. We have it's boys, but it's also the dad-deprived boys. And so rather than looking at, how many guns do we put in schools or how many, how to do this on the secondary level, let's look at the fact that if more than 90% of our mass shooters are dad-deprived boys, what is there about deprivation that leads to our sons being so angry? And the basic answer is the postponed gratification issue. The boundary enforcement teaches kids to postpone their gratification, to have to finish those peas before they get their ice cream, and that leads to kids feeling proud of themselves, not depressed, not withdrawing into video game addiction or porn addiction. And so the things that we're attacking, as you said, that are secondary issues rather than understanding the importance of that dad deprivation.
I'm going to have the talk. Lynette wants me to have the talk with Sonny soon. He's 12. I'm going to have to talk to him about gradually making the transition from video addiction to porn addiction.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage.
You're almost a man now. I don't want to sound like Johnny Cash, but it's time for you to put down the joystick and pick up the joystick. Now, look, I need you a little less. I'll tell you what, let's start with just 2 hours a fortnight, 1 hour you porn a night, and then we'll see if we can just sort of make the transition just into being addicted to pornography.
Speaking of transition, I have another talk I want to have with you.
Oh, no. You want to play tennis?
I have many follow-ups, so if you have a read to do,
I don't. I don't. I thought that this thing is like, well, you don't want to start getting judgy. Like, oh, you don't want to judge. Like, we don't want to judge. There's school shootings. I think it's okay for a little judging. 5 people have been shot in Chicago by a 14-year-old in the last 20 minutes. I think it's okay to judge. Yeah. We do much more judging of smokers than we do of deadbeat dads. Yeah. It's insane that, we can't judge. We can't get involved with that. Like, yeah, there's people slaughtering people in schools and on the streets of Chicago. We do a little judging. Yeah. Get involved. Go ahead, Brian.
I have a question. I have so many follow-ups, but my first one was about something you just talked about. The dad deprivation stats are amazing, and it makes sense. I'm wondering, is there any data, not for or against, but is there a difference in the data? Is it 2-parent households or one parent, i.e. like gay and lesbian couples? Do their kids do better, worse? Absence of a dad, absence of a masculine presence. I'm wondering if there's any data or studies on those.
Yeah, we have very poor evidence so far. We have 2 sets of data on gay parents, and one is from gay communities where the children do just great. The other is from more conservative communities where the children do just terribly. And so
makes sense.
And and we don't have longitudinal data yet because in large numbers we haven't seen how the children turn out when they're age 30, 40. Sure. So we're in the process of getting that. My guess is there's a lot of advantages and a lot of disadvantages. By advantages, self-selected parents are usually very devoted and loving, and they usually have a lot of education.
They've gone through barriers of entry.
But we also have, with adopted children, we have the same type of self-selection on the part of the parents, educated, motivated, loving, and we have a lot of challenges with adopted children. So whether or not children are going to have that same experience with gay parents as they do with adoptive parents has yet to be seen. But my sense is that you will have that same type of phenomenon as you have with adoptive parents, where there's a lot of love, a lot of caring, a lot of education, a lot of consciousness, and at the same time, the child grows up feeling, I feel like a duck and I'm being raised by a chicken. Who am I? Right. That's the underlying challenge of the adopted child, or the child that doesn't feel like she or he knows the biological father or biological mother. We have my wife from a former marriage adopted a child, and we had somebody over that was talking about the farm that he was on, and about the ducks, the chicken that was raising the ducks, and the ducks all waddled down to the pond and jumped into the pond, and the chicken was going crazy, like, where are you? Jump in the pond, and then. And my adopted daughter said that's exactly the way I feel. I feel like a duck raised by a chicken.
Huh? Interesting.
Good question, and a follow-up. And we sort of knew the answer because it's a self-selecting group that really wants to have kids.
You've gone through hoops.
So until gay couples can just have kids by mistake, like we do.
Can't really
until they evolve.
It's a little bit harder for them.
Until the unwanted kids.
God knows they try.
Boy, do they try.